Good morning, class. We're going to look some more at Luke 22 this morning. I hope y'all are doing all right being quarantined. And now that we've had the stay-at-home order, it's gotten kind of worse for everybody, I guess. We're in day 20, I think. And so far, I have been to two places outside the house. I went to Costco the other morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I went to the church building for a little while the other day. But other than that, I've been staying home. So we'll see how it goes and how long it goes. I suppose if I can spend 6 months at sea without ever seeing any ports or anything, I can stand this for a while. But in chapter 22, we looked at the fact that it was the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the disciples had to prepare the Passover. We saw where Judas Iscariot had conspired and agreed for 30 pieces of silver that he would turn over Jesus. We looked at Jesus instituting the Lord's Supper. And we also looked at the disciples arguing over who was the greatest when Jesus had to tell them again that those that serve and those who are the most humble are actually the greatest in the kingdom. And Jesus also predicts the fact that Peter's going to deny him that very night. In fact, he says he's going to deny him 3 times before the rooster crowed. And that's about the time we left off. And so now we're going to look at Luke chapter 22 and starting with verse 35. And he said to them, when I sent you without money, bag, knapsack, that word knapsack actually means a wallet or a purse, like a leather wallet or a leather purse. I guess knapsack was the closest they could get to a modern meaning. But he says, when I sent you without money, bag, knapsack, and sandals, did you lack anything? And he's talking here about the limited commission because he had sent them out previously and he told them not to take all those things and to rely on people wherever they were going to go to provide them with the things they needed. And when they got back, he asked them, did they lack anything? And they said no. So everything worked out fine. And he asked them, so they said nothing. And he says to them in verse 36, but now, and see, here's the key to this, but now, because he's letting them know things are getting ready to change drastically for them. He says, but now, he who has a money bag, let him take it, and likewise a knapsack. And he who has no sword, let him sell his garments and buy one. For I say to you that this which is written must still be accomplished in me. And then he quotes from Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 12, where he says, he was numbered with the transgressors. And what that means is things are going okay for them right now. They're with Jesus and everyone's treating them fine. But Jesus is getting ready to become, in the eyes of a lot of the Jews, a criminal. And then he says, for the things concerning me have an end. And that means that the way it's been so far, and he's talking about himself, with me and you, are getting ready to change. So they said, Lord, look, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. This is a set of scriptures that's hard to understand. In fact, when I was looking up different ideas on what this really means, I found no less than 4 commonly used explanations to try to figure out what this means. This is the best way I can understand this, because there's people that think that when Jesus said to take your cloak and sell them and get swords, that he's talking figuratively. Some people think he's talking literally, that they're going to need swords, and it could be either. But I'm going to say it this way. I think he was probably being figurative here. Jesus is telling them that perilous times are coming. And he tells them they're going to have to be prepared. The swords that he has in mind could very well be sort of like what Paul talks about, spiritual sword. It could be talking about just the fact that they could use weapons of strong faith, fervent love, and things like that as swords. I don't know. But it seems to me that it's kind of figurative. And then they say, look, here are two swords. And he said, it is enough. Now, does that mean there's two swords is enough? I don't think that's what he's saying. My opinion is on this that he is saying it's enough, as in, I'm not talking about it anymore. And the reason I say that is because Jesus has talked to them figuratively in the past, and they didn't get it. In fact, I'm going to go to Mark chapter 8. And in Mark chapter 8, Jesus feeds the 4,000. And he does it miraculously, if you remember the story. And it says in chapter 8, starting with verse 13, and he left them, and getting into the boat again, departed to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and they did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. Then he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Now, you know he's talking figuratively here. Then it says, and they reasoned among themselves, saying, it's because we have no bread. But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Jesus is talking about the apostles having hard hearts. And he's getting ready to tell them what it means to have a hard heart. He says then, having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? So what is it to have a hard heart? It's having eyes and not seeing, and having ears not hearing, and not remembering what's said. Then he says, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said to him, 12. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said, 7. So he said to them, how is it you do not understand? Now I go back to Mark 8, because I think it's the same thing here. When he talks about selling their cloaks and buying swords and being prepared, I think they're taking him too literally. And now he says, it's enough. And he may not have wanted to just try to explain things because his time was up. They had to leave. They had to get to the Garden of Gethsemane. And also, he knew that in just a little over 7 weeks, the Holy Spirit was going to come upon these apostles, and then they would understand. And then we go to verse 39. It says, coming out, he went to the Mount of Olives, which was right next to Jerusalem, as he was accustomed. So this was a place where he would go at night, evidently a lot. And by the way, Judas would also know this. And his disciples also followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, pray that you may not enter into temptation. Notice how he says, when he came to the place. This was evidently the place where Jesus would come often. This was in the Garden of Gethsemane. Luke doesn't mention this, but we know from both Matthew and Mark that it is in Gethsemane. Gethsemane is a word that means oil press. Gethsemane, even today, still has the olive trees, and they had oil presses because they would press olives to get oil. So when you would say be anointed for the purpose of being a king or for the purpose of being a priest, you would get anointed with olive oil, and they would press the olives right there, I guess, in the olive orchard or olive grove. Well, he goes to the place called Gethsemane, and he begins to pray. He tells them, and this is very important, and it's important to us too. He says, pray that you enter not into temptation. What could be a better way to prevent yourself from falling into temptation than to pray? I don't know of any. And he says, and when he was withdrawn from them about a stone's throw, and he knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if it's your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. What he means by this cup was also used to represent joy or also sorrow. And here he's talking about this cup, he's talking about the sorrow that he's fixing to experience. And he asked God, the Father, will you please take this from me? Because he knows how badly he's going to suffer and then die. And despite the fact that he's God and man, he's still man. And this idea of all this pain and suffering and all is all just as real as it would be for you and I. If we knew we were going to be tortured, wouldn't we want God to take that away from us? But then he says, but your will be done. So he is willing to do whatever he needs to do. Then an angel appeared to him from heaven. And an angel is a Greek transliteration. It's a word that means messenger. So this angel appears to him from heaven, strengthening him. Notice God doesn't take away what Jesus has to do, but he gives him the strength to endure it. We don't know what this angel did to strengthen him, whether it would be just to try to encourage him by letting him know the value of what he's getting ready to do. I don't know. And in verse 44, it says, and being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Even though this angel has come and strengthened him, he is praying harder and harder. Then his sweat became like great drops of blood falling to the ground. There have been medical and scientific examples of people that were under so great amount of stress that blood would actually ooze from the pores of their skin. And if this was how he did this, and then that combined with sweat, it just, if you've ever seen, I'll just tell you this way. If you've ever watched professional wrestling, well, back in the day, they don't do it anymore. You'd have to look at something showing the history of professional wrestling or something. But a long time ago, professional wrestlers would, in the middle of a match, cut themselves on their forehead. And they just put a little cut and it would bleed, and all the sweat and everything going on, their whole face would look like it was just covered in blood. And it was a really dramatic effect, but they didn't bleed all that much. And I kind of picture it like this. He's got these drops of blood that are coming out of his skin, and he's sweating, and it probably was just dripping to the ground like blood. And then in verse 45, we see that it says, when he rose up from prayer and had come to his disciples, he found them sleeping from sorrow. I find that very interesting because, you'd think they were just tired. But he has been telling them about all the things that they're going to have to do. And just recently, we just read where he told them that things were changing and they were going to have to carry money and a knapsack. And he says they're going to have to sell their cloaks to be sold so they could buy swords. In other words, he's telling them things are getting ready to change and it's going to get bad. And I'm going to be numbered with the transgressors. They don't know exactly what's going to happen, but they know it's bad. And they see Jesus praying and praying. And so they're more than likely, pretty stressed about it. And they end up sleeping because of that. Then he said to them, why do you sleep? Rise and pray, lest you enter into temptation. Here he tells them again, if you want to avoid temptation, you've got to pray. And it's the same with us. If we want to avoid temptation, we have to pray. Will God take our troubles away from us? No, he didn't take the troubles away from Jesus either, because certain things need to be done. Certain things are going to happen. But all God promises us is that we'll have the strength to endure and he will stay with us no matter what. And then he also promises us that if we're faithful children of his, that no matter what happens, we will end up in eternity with him. That's why we pray that we don't enter into temptation. That's why even if we have bad circumstances happen to us, that we can still take heart because we know that God will be with us no matter what. And that even at the end of time, even if we have very bad things that happen to us, and let's face it, there's a lot of things that go on with life. There's sickness, there's disease. Well, look at what's going on now. We're being quarantined. It's not good. People are going to be losing their jobs. Just all kinds of bad things are happening right now. God doesn't promise that bad things aren't going to happen. He just promises us the strength to endure, and he promises us many blessings and the hope of heaven. And hope, don't forget, means expectation. It doesn't mean a wish. The word hope actually means there's an expectation. So we have this expectation of heaven, and because of that, we can endure the temptation and we can overcome the temptation. Because if you pray that you don't enter in temptation, it still means that you have to, through your own heart and mind, overcome whatever adversity you're experiencing right now or in the future. It's still up to you whether or not you're going to let the temptation lead you down the right path or the wrong path. It's up to you. But if you pray, God will strengthen you. And if you pray, God sometimes sends things your way that you don't even realize are going to be sent your way to help you. So the point is, just like the apostles and just like Jesus, if you want to avoid temptation, if you want to overcome temptation, you're going to have to pray. And if you haven't had a prayerful life up to this point, now's the time to begin. Even if it's a short prayer, even if you're not sure exactly what to say, you've got to begin to pray if you expect to overcome temptation in the future. Remember to pray. Remember that Jesus prayed to overcome. Remember, he told the disciples, the apostles, to overcome by prayer. And so I'm going to leave the lesson here. Next week, we'll talk about him being arrested, and we'll see how far we get into the trial. But for this week, read Luke chapter 22. Read it again. Read on through chapter 23. But anyway, as you're stuck at home, spend your time doing something constructive and pray. But until next time, hope you have a great week. And text me if you have any questions. Text me if you have any concerns, especially about this lesson. If you've got some comments or concerns about the lesson, send me a text. I'll be happy to answer. I'll be happy to talk to you on the phone. Just let me know. See you later.